In this video, we are going to be talking about the Alfred Hitchcock film from 1963, The Birds, which starred Tippi Hedren, Rod Taylor, Jessica Tandy, Suzanne Pleshette, and Veronica Cartwright. And my guest today is Christine French, who is a historian, screenwriter, and author of the upcoming book on Hitchcock, Alfred Hitchcock's Architectural Infatuations, Villains, Lairs, Skyscrapers, Mansions, and Motels. Her unproduced screenplay, Piney Croft, a paranormal horror feature, was a semi-finalist at the Orlando Film Festival and selected by iHorror Film Festival and the Northeast Film Festival Horror Fest. She currently works as Director of Development with the California Preservation Foundation and has a history of saving big buildings. I love that. So Christine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Robert. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. I'm as excited to have you on because I really enjoyed your presentation at the recent HitchCon, which some of my viewers, I'm sure, were there. So I wanted to ask you before we talked about, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your interest in the architecture of Hitchcock, but when did you just get interested in his films? Was it from, did it come later in your life, or was it like in childhood, or when did you start getting interested in his work?
I think like a lot of people, one of my theories is that you're actually born knowing who Hitchcock is, if you're into film at all, right? So even, in that documentary 7852, a director talks about how his young daughter knew like eat from Psycho, which is obviously one of my favorite movies. As you can see, I've just emerged from the Bates Mansion to have this interview with you. But that, even at a young age, you are exposed to Hitchcock. You don't even know it. It's like he's always in your life. And so I was a child of the 70s, so I watched a lot of those shows on Saturday afternoon TV, which I've heard a lot of people talk about. That's their first exposure to horror, actually, was Saturday afternoon television.
That's interesting. So that was like the Alfred Hitchcock, like the Present show. Is that what you're?
And they just play the movies on, on Saturdays, right? On Saturday afternoons. I watched probably a lot of inappropriate things on Saturday afternoons. This was the 70s, Robert,
Yeah, different time, right? Okay, great. And then what got you interested in writing the book on the architecture in his films?
All right. Well, so that I'm like a lot of other film fans, you watch the movie again and again, and you're like, I really want to learn more about what's happening there. Right. And so I am a trained architectural historian. I've been a historian for 25 years. And I started to look at film from this different lens, so to speak. And, I would look at something like the Bates Mansion, which is behind me, and I would say, well, what really inspired the production designer to create a building like that? What because they were drawing from real life, just like production designers do today. They're pulling things from their neighborhoods, from their experiences, from their travels. And so that's how I started getting involved in it. And then I found a bunch of great stories that made me want to keep going back to the universe. So I wanted to share that really with the book that I wrote.
Awesome. And that's coming out in about a year, right?
Yeah, October 2022. I'm very excited.
No, I can't wait for that. So, it's the month of October. Of course, a lot of people are watching horror films. So The Birds is a perfect one. I think it's great even for younger kids because it's not really too scary. So I was curious, I know because you're a big horror fan as well. What are your thoughts on this one here, The Birds?
Well, I love the way that you say that The Birds is sort of an entry-level horror for children. But, that's also, children are exposed to horror in all kinds of ways. Snow White is actually very scary, the Disney one.
It's true.
There's witches and, dragons and things that are going to get you. And it's actually a natural part of storytelling. Kids gravitate towards scary stories, just like the rest of us. And The Birds is indeed what you'd call a beginner horror. I was watching House of a Thousand Corpses by Rob Zombie.
Oh God!
Oh my gosh! And my son said, He goes, this is advanced horror. He goes, this is not
Ah,
for the amateur. And I'm like, you betcha, that was a
oh
tough one.
my God, that movie, man. My former co-host loved it. So we reviewed it last year, and the whole time I was just like, when is this ending?
It brought me to the border of what I like. I prefer, I like, the birds, and I prefer paranormal. It's slight demonic possession is really my thing. So
This is, we talked a little earlier about, whether this is sort of a simple story, but do you think that it's simply this, these birds attacking and taking over the world as some characters suggest, or do you think this film has more of a kind of spine or essence to it?
I think so. I mean, we're going to assume that most people have seen the birds, or stop watching now and go watch the birds and
Oh
come
yeah, I'm
back,
all
right?
spoiler. I'm all spoilers here. Don't worry about it.
I think that this is actually a really simple story. So I rewatched it last night and I reread some of the books about it. And it's a very simple story. But I like to bring people back to the period that it came out, right? So it came out in 63. So if you were actually in 1963, there was a lot of activity where the environmental movement had not really started yet, right? Because that started more in the 70s. And people were afraid of nature. Nature bites back, right? And I know there's some metaphors that the birds actually represent the fears of the Cold War fears and things like that. But do you remember later on there was like Attack of the Killer Bees, and even before that there was like the giant tarantulas and the
Yeah.
ants are going to get you. So I think you could see it in the horror in that kind of genre of nature will come back at you for no reason whatsoever. And Hitchcock actually said that. He said that after he read the book about the birds, that he just thought it was a great story and it didn't matter to him why the birds were attacking or not.
Like the characters, I've seen it quite a few times, but the first 45 minutes, I love how he really takes his time. I mean, the birds don't really start attacking until almost an hour into the film, and within the first hour it's just those subtle suggestions that something is going to happen. Right off the top, we see when Tippi Hedren appears, we see all those birds hovering in San Francisco, and then the seagull flying into Susan Plachette's door and dies. And there's always just these subtle suggestions that something is lurking around the corner. But if you look at like Tippi Hedren's character, she was someone whose mother abandoned her when she was 11, and you get the sense that she feels lost in a way, like she's in the gossip columns in her father's newspaper a lot. She was like caught with some certain gags that she had to go to trial over. So you get the sense that she's rebellious, but has a void. And then if you look at Rod Taylor and his mother, his mother is very much so concerned about being abandoned, and because the father died, and she's so possessive and jealous over any other woman who comes in her way. And that kind of goes to Hitchcock and mothers in movies, like even in Psycho, of course, being so possessive. But obviously here it's much more, I mean, Jessica Tandy's much more sympathetic, because that great monologue she has in the bedroom later on, where she talks about she's afraid of being abandoned because her husband died. I just love that. So I think it's really these people coming together. I mean, it ends beautifully where and I never really noticed it. I don't know why, but she's cuddling her in the car as they're about to drive away. Jessica Tandy's is holding Tippi Hedren, and you get to see that these people are filling each other's void and emptiness. And I mean, that never really popped out to me. I was always more about, okay, yeah, it's the birds attacking and they need to get away. And like, I don't know, is that something that stood out to you this on your last viewing?
Well, yeah, well, for sure. First, Robert, how did they fit those three people in the backseat of that convertible? Come on. I have sat in the back of those things. You can't even put your feet on the floor. And they got Veronica Cartwright, Tippi Hedren, and Jessica Tandy back there in the back seat.
Only Hitchcock can make you believe someone could fit in
I
there,
know
right?
that they was, oh, and they had the little lovebirds too, which was
Yeah, I
funny.
love that. Yeah.
I noticed a lot of stuff. So let's go to the ladies for a minute. So this movie actually has a lot of major female characters, which
Yeah.
I found very interesting on the rewatching. But they never really explain, Jessica Tandy, plays the mother. She was the exact same age as me, by the way, when she played that character. She was 54, but she's playing the mother of Rod Taylor. And inexplicably, she has this like 13-year-old child at the same time. And all of the females, though, I kept thinking that in this movie, Hitchcock is playing a lot of jokes on us, as you know, because he was fond of doing that. And so, I kept thinking like cat fight when the ladies, Suzanne Pleshette and Tippi Hedren are kind of like sparring over the male character of Rod Taylor. In the very beginning, when you watch the beginning, and Tippi Hedren's in the bird store going to buy the bird, and the lady who's referring to the bird as if it's a man, she's like, "Oh, I'm not sure when he's going to get here. Can you teach him how to speak?" Oh no, and she's like, it's almost like she's talking about a man. And then in walks Rod Taylor, and he's like the subject. Then he's the cock of the walk, I guess you could say. The whole thing is like very much a metaphor for human relations, and the birds are just kind of a secondary like horror aspect of it, which is so interesting. It's very deep in the character development, I think.
Yeah, no, well said. I never caught that the woman off the top is referring to the bird, assuming it's a he, without I imagine that's what you're referring to. Like,
at the very beginning, she walks in the pet store and she's like, "Oh, when's he gonna get here?" That's right. And she's like, "Oh, he's gonna be here around 3:00." And she's like, "Well, I've been waiting for him." I mean, the way she talks about it, as if and then only later does she reveal that she's getting a minor bird for her aunt or something. And I'll bring, I like to do a lot of time travel, so let me take you back to the 60s and 70s. People actually owned minor birds. It's very weird now. You never see anyone with a minor bird, but there must have been some kind of importing kind of a thing, and a lot of people actually had minor birds, and it was very unusual. So it's not that crazy that she was asking for a minor bird.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, because I'm not someone who knows a lot about birds, so I just figured whatever bird she's looking for,
they were very popular, and they talked and they squawked. It's better that people don't own them. They need a lot of attention. They're tropical exotic birds, but this was during a different period.
I had no idea. But what I also like is how much if you really read the dialogue on paper, everyone's being so polite to each other, but it's so much about what's really going on between them. Like, as soon as she meets Susan Pleshette, Tippi Hedren, she asks where what the name of his sister is, so she can write the letter. And as soon as Mitch comes up, you see Susan Pleshette knows, oh, okay, a woman here with this fur coat looking for Mitch. There must be something romantic going on. And it's all just in her reaction, the jealousy and the suspicion. But they never say anything which would, other than, well, you're acting mysterious. There's a little bit, but it's all very, very polite. And even when Jessica Tandy meets Tippi Hedren, it's just the way she looks at her with this mistrust and this scorn, but all they say is "nice to meet you," like on paper. So it was interesting how so much is happening in between the lines, and really on the expressions of the actors, as opposed to someone actually saying something directly about how they're feeling in that moment. I mean, those reactions pop out to you. They really did for me this time.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the screenplay for a minute. So a lot of people have commented the screenplay was by Evan Hunter, who is also known as Ed McBain, but his real name is Salvatore Albert Lombino or something. And I thought, wow, he's got a lot of names, this guy. Anyway, so Evan Hunter wrote the screenplay, and a lot of people say, well, it was so flat. So you can really see, if you're just reading it, it does read kind of flat. So you can see in this movie that the caliber, then the quality of the actors and the directing and everything else, the team that brought it together, like really expanded on, just with, Hitchcock used to say that he loved when he didn't want his actors to make a lot of faces, right? Is one of his famous things. He just wanted them to sort of look and just, look at the camera and not do anything, and everything else around them is what's bringing you the character, the story.
Because of all of his editing.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that in The Birds, because some of those, if you read the lines, you're like, God, if I wrote that, I'd never get my screenplay approved, right? But somehow it works. And the way that the characters come together is so precise, and each one is introduced in turn, and it's easy to understand. I think it's a very simple story, actually.
Absolutely. No, it really is. And it has, like I said, it just has that heart of I suppose, like with the Hitchcock conference, of people looking for love or looking for a void to fill, which everyone, the main characters anyways, certainly are. Did you see the characters as being more flawed people, or did you think it was sort of like the heroes and the villains being the birds being the villains and the heroes being all the humans?
I think it's interesting because, when we're talking about the characters, I don't even think of the birds anymore. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So even though the birds are supposed to be, like, I guess, the primary antagonist of the story, I think each person is deeply flawed in this story. So they all have, maybe even the little girl has her own little flaws, poor little Veronica. But something that struck me was that, so you were saying Melanie is Tippi Hedren's screen name, right? So, okay. So Melanie is always talking about how she got in trouble because she jumped in the fountain naked in Rome. And that's why she had to get, that's why she was splashed all over the newspapers. And that's how, Mitch found out that who she was, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm like, why did they keep referencing this fountain in Rome and this naked jumping in the water thing? So I started looking up, and I think it's really related to that movie from 1960 by Federico Fellini, La Dolce Vita.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. And she jumps in the fountain and very sexy. Yeah. And, and it's this huge famous scene. And that movie came out 3 years before The Birds. And I think this is like Hitchcock and the screenwriter sort of giving this kind of reference to that movie. I
was wondering about that too. That certainly popped into my head.
Yeah, I have not seen that whole movie. I feel bad. I am putting that right at the top of my list because it's obviously a classic. Yeah. But when you watch it, you can see that that Hitchcock and Fellini obviously had similar approaches in the way that they look at scene and the way that they direct, the way that they bring you in. Anyway, so I think that this is related, the La Dolce Vita fountain scene. And then the other thing he does is he makes Melanie is the daughter of a newspaper guy.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And Hitchcock and Orson Welles always were in competition. And Orson Welles, of course, played William Randolph Hearst, who was a newspaper guy in San Francisco. And so I think a lot of this funny stuff that Hitchcock does are these little references to everybody else that's around him that he's kind of jokingly referencing.
That's interesting because I hadn't thought about it. And that is probably a good possibility, because I was reading the book that came out maybe 8 or 9 years ago called Lunches with Orson, which is Welles talking to another filmmaker and their conversations over lunch. And Hitchcock came up and he was totally trashing Hitchcock. And I wondered if it was he said he only really liked his British films. He felt that his American films weren't that good. And I wonder if it's because, he came into America very much where Welles worked, and now the competition was much more direct as opposed to, well, he's someone in Britain. It was a different market. And I wonder about that because he did not speak highly of him.
But they were poking each other all the time. So Touch of Evil. So Orson Welles directed Touch of Evil. That came out, I think, 1959, and then Psycho came out in 1960. They used the same actress. They both used Janet Leigh as the lady in peril, and they both had these kind of horrific scenes at motels, and the same production designer on both films. So they were like constantly like poking each other, and they were both famous directors. And so anyway, so I think there's a reference in there in The Birds where he's poking fun at Orson Welles.
That's so funny because I never would have thought of that. I certainly had the La Dolce Vita popped into my head, but one thing that really popped out to me was that because I used to really think that it was a more cut and dry, that they were the good people and everyone and the birds were the villains. But as you said, they have their share of flaws. Like Mitch, for example, he's incredibly arrogant, and the way he talks to Tippi Hedren when he was accusing her of lying about the because she says, well, I didn't jump into the fountain, I got pushed, and they just made that up, that my clothes were off, and he accuses her of lying, and then immediately says, I'll see you again, we'll see each other again, like just so pompous. And he was even made that joke about one of that person he was a murderer he was defending, because I'm not sure if we mentioned that he's a lawyer, and he makes that joke about the fact that, well, he because his wife changed the channel, so he shot him in the head 6 times.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Let's talk about that scene for a second, because when I was watching that, they just sort of like laugh about it.
Yeah.
The little girl is like,
he's more like, this is terrible, and he's laughing.
Yeah, and the little girl is telling that story to Melanie, and she's saying, "Oh yeah, he just defended this case, and the guy shot the wife 6 times." And he's like, "Oh, she changed the channel," and then she's just playing the piano, and they're like, "Oh well, I guess she died."
Yeah.
I thought that was very weird.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, it's part of like Hitchcock's sixth sense of humor that I think you see in Rod Taylor's character, but it certainly goes over Tippi Hedren's head. But you see the daughter is more like talks about how he defends like a bunch of like monsters and people who are murdering people. Like, just it's interesting that he just makes light of all that.
I think he's dismissing the idea of murder being bad or something, and then immediately after, he's going to kill the main characters or threaten them with death.
That which is so interesting, and that was something that didn't pop out to me. And of course, with Tippi Hedren, she certainly gets caught in a number of lies. Like, she first tells Rod Taylor that she works there just because she wants to strike up a conversation with him, and she doesn't work there. And then she also lies about why she was there when she delivers the birds. She says that she knew Suzanne Blechette's character and that they were all friends. And of course, that was, I mean, they're not serious lies. They're just little white lies, right? But then later on, when she goes, because she says, oh, I'm staying with Suzanne Blechette's character. And when she goes later on to see Suzanne to ask if she can stay there because she's got that room to rent, she says that she can't find a place anywhere else. But I wondered if that was true, because she kind of had to stay there in order to convince Rod Taylor that was true.
He basically lies to everybody. So that lead character, me and you, I think it's funny, me and you keep switching from their real names to their fake names. Okay, so Melanie, I always forget I do too. I forget everybody's name too. So Melanie is Tippi Hedren. So Melanie is she just lies and lies and lies to everybody. So but here's the thing that Hitchcock does to the women in a lot of his things. Well, first, there's all that weird mother stuff in The Birds, which is also in Psycho and a lot of the other films that he did. But then he always like punishes the lady at the end, right? So she, in Psycho, for instance, Janet Leigh is a very strong woman who is, I'm going to just steal this money and finally make my own way in this world and do something, bold and brave and ill-advised, perhaps. She's killed, right? Horrifically for her mistake. And then Melanie is always lying and taking advantage. And she's very, privileged and, aloof and elite. Like, she can get away with everything. And then in the end, she's like horrifically punished. And even in real life, she was punished. That scene was terrible for her to film. She had to spend time in the hospital after they filmed that scene with her up in the room and all the birds attack. Like, one pecked her near the eye, and she was traumatized for a long time over the experience. And so each of these women and even Suzanne Plachette is punished because she plays the teacher.
Right.
Who is, she follows Mitch around, and then she's like, but that's okay, I'm over it. She makes friends with the blonde lady. Boom, she's murdered. So, he just punishes the women in his movies for sure.
Well, that's a good point, because even though, as we said, she's privileged attitude. Like, I mean, even when she finds Mitch, she just like breaks into his place and puts the birds there. Like she feels that she could do whatever.
That's her joke, like, haha, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
leave these birds here and then go off on the boat in her fur coat, by the way, and her probably very expensive wool dress. I was like,
Yeah.
girl, how does she row in a boat with that outfit?
And it's also normal to her. Like you could tell everyone else in Bodega Bay is more like, they're more like working class fishermen, and they're sort of looking at her like, what the hell? Like, who
What
is
the
this
heck?
woman? And how, and she was so confident with that boat, which I was.
That's what I thought was so funny. And she's like, has her little heels, her pumps, and she like leaps out of the boat with the birds. I'm like, wow, I wonder how many takes that took.
Oh
But
God, yeah.
But
I
Bodega
wondered
Bay is really cool. I've never been there. Have you ever been to Bodega Bay?
I haven't. No, I haven't been there. But that was like he did a lot of on location shooting, right? So I imagine.
Yeah, it was there, but it was also, I think there's a town called Bodega, which is more inland than Bodega Bay, where I think that they filmed a lot, because the schoolhouse is something I wanted to talk about with you, because of architecture and Alfred Hitchcock. So in the birds, I don't talk about a lot about the birds in my book in particular, because the architecture does not play a huge part in the story. I guess you could say a little bit of it, the way where the house, where the final scenes are, like they're really, but the key point for me was the schoolhouse.
Which was haunted, right? Like
the school, I'm sure it is. It was actually, what I know about it. Okay, so the production designer is Robert Boyle for the birds, and he's, the Academy Award winning, did a ton of work for Hitchcock and a lot of other famous directors. So the production design team actually found that building, and it was all boarded up. It was going to be demolished in 1962. It was going to be demolished, and they're like, this is perfect to horrify children and adults alike. So they actually patched it up, put it in the birds, and then the movie was so popular that that building never got demolished. Like, it immediately became an icon of the movie. So that's what I find fascinating about architecture in film. It's like a building that was like ready to go and they're going to tear it down. It's like everybody wants to come visit, and the building is still like a pilgrimage site for fans of the birds.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. Yeah. And I also read that the gas station in this film, that was never there, but they ended up building a gas station.
Oh, really?
I read that last night. And apparently, though, they were saying that schoolhouse was a haunted schoolhouse. And Susan Plachette had said that when you were in there, you felt as though there was tons of people in there. It just had this presence. And when they told Hitchcock that there's these stories that this schoolhouse is haunted, it made him even more excited to go there, because
I want to go there. Totally. I mean, it's a 19th century building. I forget the architect's name. I didn't write it down for today, but you can look it up easy online if anyone's interested. The history of the building is pretty cool. I think it's actually on the National Register of Historic Places now.
Oh,
so,
wow.
And it never got torn down. So they saved the building by featuring it in this movie.
Well, that would be a cool trip to take to check all that out. I mean, I know that he wanted to make it as painstakingly real as possible. And I imagine he did that so that it felt real, because it's already such a tongue-in-cheek idea, birds attacking, and like on paper, and a lot of his stories on paper look rather silly, but then he made them with that roller coaster ride of like having humor, but also having scenes that were very scary, very terrifying. So the more real that the town could be in the houses, then the more that people can invest in these birds, actually killer birds attacking. I mean, do you think that's why he went to such lengths to make everything so real?
I think so, but like, why do the kids leave the schoolhouse? Like all the crows are waiting on the playground equipment, and then all the kids run screaming.
Yeah,
they tell you like that is not the way to avoid an animal attack. Run screaming down the street. That is not the way to avoid it. Well, but it has to be an inciting incident. Something has to happen to start the attack. So.
Well, that was one thing. If you in Hitchcock Truffaut, he was talking about people would criticize him for, of course, far-fetched stories, things that were not plausible. But I mean, this film certainly has that like element of like, what are you doing? Like, why are you running out of the schoolhouse? Or even in the diner when the birds are attacking and the fire starts and the explosion at the gas station. Tippi Hedren suddenly just runs out and goes into the phone booth. And then I thought, why would you leave that place? But then, maybe it's just your instinct as to, I've got to get away. That's the only thing I could think of. And maybe the same with the schoolhouse. It's like they're there. Maybe they're going to break through the windows. Let's go. It's just, I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of, is just those moments of panic, and your only thing to think of is run.
But it's like every horror movie. Like if the final girl didn't go ill-advisedly up the stairs, then you wouldn't have any movie.
Exactly.
Even though the killer's up the stairs. But let's go to the diner for a second, okay?
Sure.
So the diner scene is really trippy because they go back to the diner and they're all trying to stay safe. And there's a lot of strange characters are introduced by Hitchcock there. It kind of feels like a Twilight Zone episode to me. Like the crazy lady, she comes right up to the screen and she's yelling, "It's you, you're evil, you're evil."
That scene. I love that. And that performance is so great. She was also in The Wrong Man, Doreen Lang. I love that moment. The acting is just great.
Mm-hmm. And then they have like the old sea captain, and then they have like the drunk guy. It's like they went to Hollywood Central Casting, and they just got one of each. They have the businessman they
had all those archetypes.
Yeah, it's just it's interesting. He's like shoves. It's like the scene with the most characters in it, frankly. And then after that, it just really goes to them isolated at the house.
Yeah, I love that scene too. And one thing I picked up on in that scene is that he had so much dialogue, and even just people cutting off what people are saying constantly, like in the kitchen, like, "Oh yeah, the soup's on," or whatever. And there's so much, and I imagine it was to heighten the stress of the situation and the tension, because you had that one bird, the bird woman who was like that expert saying, "No, come on, there's no way these birds could do that," and the one guy saying it's the end of the world, and it added a layer of comedy. But certainly just the tension of, and then that one woman's like, "Okay, you're scaring the children," and then she's had enough, right? And it just played on almost like farcical, in a sense, of so many people coming and going and having an input and a perspective in that scene. But I really love that scene as well. I thought that was such it worked on so many levels, as I said. But something you said interesting, just going back to, he always punished the women in his films for their flaws or their mistakes. And it's true, because you don't see the men getting, but like Rod Taylor also has his share of flaws. Like we were saying, he's pompous, he's arrogant, he makes light of his job and murders. And we don't see him get punished nearly as much as Tippi Hedren. I mean, sure enough, he gets bit a lot by the birds and stuff, but I mean, she full on gets like almost torn apart in that scene. But that's something I hear a lot about, and because I'm not a horror film expert, but often, that it's always the women are the ones getting cut up or shot up. And Brian De Palma's films were like that as well. Of course, he sort of continued on the Hitchcock suspense legacy. Is that valid? As someone a lot about horror, is that what you find, that it's always the women or the victims here?
Yeah, who's actually was super democratic in the kills is Friday the 13th. In the Friday the 13th series, there's actually 12 movies, and everybody gets killed. The guys get killed, the ladies get killed. They have a guy in a wheelchair gets killed. It's very diplomatic in that series. Everybody's going down.
Kill everybody. That's the way.
Yeah, but the ones it's just the way it is. Women are, a woman in terror is maybe a little more, film actiony, because we're like, screaming and stuff. And I like when you have someone like Jamie Lee Curtis come in and she kicks everybody's butt, like in the new Halloween. I can't wait to see Halloween Kills. I'm dying. But I wanted to talk about the kills and the birds, because I watched Dead Meat the other day. It's a like a YouTube with a guy, James, hosts it. He says there's only 3 people die in the whole movie of the birds.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because it's Susan Plachette's character, and then the businessman and the explosion.
Mm-hmm. And the farm guy with his eyes pecked out, which is pretty horrific. So that part you might want to cover your kid's face, because that part is pretty bad. So a farmer is in his house, and the mom, Jessica Tandy, finds his body, and it's they cut the scene up pretty good, and they go in closer and closer, and the man has his eyes pecked out, which is pretty horrific, actually.
And I love that he has the teacup. She sees the teacups first broken. So now, again, that's suspense because the audience now knows, oh no, as opposed to it being a big surprise of just finding him and just having the shock effect of, oh, but here we already know whatever she's going to find is going to be really, really bad. But, Jessica Tandy in this film is, man, I mean, she's incredible in this. I thought it was an amazing performance. There was one scene that I actually literally, and I usually don't get choked up in a Hitchcock movie, but when she's getting mad at Mitch later on in the film, because she's like, well, what are you going to do when the birds start to attack? And he's like, well, we'll break up the furniture. And she wants him to know exactly what he's going to do. And because he doesn't have all the answers, she gets mad and says, your father would know. And then the little girl comes in between them in that moment to stop it. And then she apologizes. I don't know, that just killed me. I mean, something about her the commitment and the emotional power she had. I thought, wow. I mean, I don't know how you felt about her in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's holding back even. I think, she's a great actress. Isn't her husband was Hume Cronin, right?
Yes.
And he wrote Rope. He wrote the screenplay for Rope. So, it's always goes around in a circle. But I think she was holding back a little bit. But yeah, fantastic actress. And Veronica Cartwright, the little girl, ended up having, she ended up having a long career as a scream queen. I guess you could say that, because she was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, screaming, right? Tons. And then she was also in Alien as one of the crew members, and with a lot of screaming. I got to interview her once at a showing of the birds.
Oh, no way.
that the Los Angeles Conservancy hosted in downtown LA, and she was really, really great.
Oh, wow. That must, when was that? Was it some
couple years ago, like 4 years ago, probably. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's amazing. Because often people don't give enough credit for the performances that actors have to give in horror, because it is, as an actor myself, it is not easy to be scared and cry all that much, and it is really exhausting. So yeah, she was just phenomenal. And I actually thought Tippi Hedren was quite good. I mean, for someone who hadn't really acted before, and that he put in this lead part. I mean, he had the confidence then to know that this is when he got sick of using stars because of the salaries they demanded and stuff like that. And he felt that the Hitchcock brand, so to speak, as he said, me and the birds are enough for this to make money. And he was starting to create stars. I mean, I think that's what his plan was. And she was going to be like the next Grace Kelly in his eyes. Of course, that didn't happen. But I actually thought she was quite good. I mean, she has that sophisticated quality of Grace Kelly, but there was maybe the scene where she talks about the fact that she was abandoned. It was a little, she didn't necessarily have the chops to really show a vulnerability there. I mean, she kind of turns her back, and you hear her sort of just sound a little sad. So I thought maybe that could have been better. But I actually thought for a debut performance, someone who hadn't really acted before, it's quite good. I don't know how you felt about her in this.
Oh yeah, I mean, she was a model. So the history, right, is that she was a model, and he picked her out, and then he and Alma gave Hitchcock's wife Alma gave Tippi a little bird pin when they decided to have her star in that movie. I thought she did really great. I think more importantly is that the performance has held up over time.
Yeah.
Right. So this movie came out a really long time ago, 63. What is that? Almost 60 years ago, right?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. So, and her performance, even when I rewatched it yesterday, she looks great. She's pulling together what a woman a very liberated, free thinking woman of 19. She's taking a class at Berkeley. I think she talked about, and she's very much in her little convertible. So she's a free thinking woman of the 60s. And I think she really brings as much as she could to it, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought she was quite good. And I was curious, there are so many iconic shots in this movie. Of course, when she's waiting outside the schoolhouse and you see a few birds and cut to her face, cut back, and there's tons of birds there. Is there any visuals, anything that he was doing here visually that stood out to you that is not talked about as much?
I'm thinking about that. Well, there is that funny scene that has Tippi Hedren in it when the fire, it's unintentionally funny. So the fire starts at the gas station and the guy's getting his cigar and he's going to smoke a cigar and everybody's
Right.
yelling at him and they open the window and they yell. And then the fire starts going up the street and there's these weird cuts of like
Yeah. Yeah. He
with her
just froze on
face.
her face. It's
Yeah,
like
her face like
yeah, I know it is quite.
increasingly getting, it's almost like a graphic novel. And I kind of laughed when I watched it yesterday. I'm like, why would you do that in your
I don't know
movie?
why he
So
did that. That is because it stands out as quite phony. So I
it's
don't
like
know.
quick cuts between like the flames
Very
and her
quick.
and her face.
Yeah.
And it's like as the flame gets closer, her face gets more horrified. It's a very quick cut. It's not Hitchcockian. That is not really the way that he did cuts in
Yeah.
his other movies. But maybe this was after Psycho. Maybe that was kind of like his own homage to the shower scene of Psycho that has a lot of these quick cuts. Maybe that was part of
It
that.
could be, yeah. I mean, he also has the POV of the birds then, and as he said to in the sky, and as he said to Truffaut, it also helped because then you didn't have to shoot as much stuff on the ground floor, like the fire trucks coming in and all that stuff, because it was so far out that it was just one shot of those birds watching,
Mm-hmm.
which I really enjoy. There was one thing he did visually here that I really liked, which had nothing to do with what the characters were saying, but all to do with what was really going on based on his visuals. Like when after the first attack in the house, Rod Taylor is talking to the police officer who's investigating it, and he kept cutting to Tippi Hedren watching Jessica Tandy as she's picking up a glass, she's putting it down, and then she's putting it back down again. Like she seems like totally out of sorts. And you're not really focused on the dialogue. You're focused on what Jessica Tandy's doing, and then Tippi Hedren watching and cutting back and forth. And then Tippi Hedren says, "I better stay tonight." And and then you justify that she sees that, justify the line, because now you know that she sees that Jessica Tandy is out of sorts, and so she better stay so that she can basically help out, and she kind of takes over her role in the sense of being stronger because Jessica Tandy's falling apart, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. I don't know if that popped out to you.
Yeah, I mean, the whole relationship with the women is also a little bit weird because Mitch calls his mom darling and dear. And,
I noticed that. Yeah.
It's a little bit like maybe that's just in today's convention, but I was like, that's kind of weird that you would call your mother darling. And especially because in today's world, that's their age difference is not that great. And they make Jessica Tandy look like a really old lady. Which makes me laugh when she's not really that old. 54 is not that old. Anyway, so their relationship,
she would have been like 19 when she would have had Rod Taylor. And then
and she would have been like 40 when she had Veronica Cartwright as the daughter.
But
but it's
not
weird.
As
and then
common. I know what you mean. It sort of takes you out of it because I thought that was Rod Taylor's daughter, even though I've seen it a few times. And
that's what's so weird, right?
Wait,
and
no,
even
that's his sister.
and even Melanie is confused. She's like, "Oh, the children," and he's like, "Yeah, it's Mitch and the little girl." And yeah, it's very confusing. It's a very strange family collection that's never explained ever why that is. So
yeah, he certainly gives you enough so that you know that all of their problems, Mitch is basically has this mother who needs him to such a degree, and he's stuck because he can't get on with his life, and she can't get on with hers because of the loss of her husband, and she's falling apart. And here comes Tippi, who's like the person who they all kind of come together. But
the birds brought them together then. See, so the birds cannot be the enemy then. The birds actually brought all these humans back together and overcome their problems.
Well, that's the interesting thing, because she sort of brings the birds with her because they start in San Francisco and they follow her. Of course, the other part is, she gets hit by the seagull. That was another subtle look at something bad is going to happen around the corner. But yeah, you don't know why they're, you don't know why they're attacking, if that's like an end of the world thing. Even at the end, it just ends with them driving out, but the birds are still very much there. So it's sort of bittersweet, because it's like on the one hand, they brought these people together in a good way, but is this the end of the world? Like,
I think that's where you can get your Cold War analogies and things
right.
from that, because you can see that at the original invasion of the body snatchers, it's the same thing. It's like, well, how did it end? I don't know. Did the aliens take over everybody? They just kind of like float away.
It's
Everybody just floats
ambiguous.
away to the story. Yeah, very ambiguous. And I think that's one of the key things about that story and others from that period are you don't really know where the danger is, which Hitchcock loved that. He
Right.
wanted you to, is the danger in the shower? Is the danger in the place where you thought you were secure? And that's what I think he used as key to his horror, was creating uncertainty in what you thought was a certain environment.
Yeah, no, exactly. Very well said. There's also another moment I like where Tippi Hedren she's comforting the daughter, because her daughter, Jessica Tandy's daughter, suddenly feels sick, and she's the one to say, "Oh, come with me, I'll help you." And they cut to Jessica Tandy sort of looking with a sense of, "What about me?" And again, there's nothing that's said in the dialogue that the audience has to listen to what they're saying. It's all in the visuals. So, of course, he has, in all his films, he always preferred to tell things as visually as possible, and the dialogue being secondary to that. That's just the tradition in which he was born into. But I've always had a soft spot for this film, because I know some people, some Hitchcock fans, like some people don't even really care for it. I don't know why. Maybe because it was an early one for me. I remember seeing it as a kid, and I kind of revisited it over the years, every few years or so. But I've always enjoyed it, and I think it's a great film for Halloween, and even, as I said, to show some young kids, because it's not that scary.
Except for the scene with the eyes poked out.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's okay though. It is Halloween season, which is my favorite time of the year, by the way.
Oh, I love it too. I love this time of year. Was there anything else about this movie you wanted to mention?
No, but I would definitely recommend watching it. And then a good way to watch, I think, Hitchcock's films is to look at the things that come before it and after it and put it in that context. So even if it's Hitchcockian or not, like what other films came out in 1963, what other like horror movies came out. And then you can start seeing these patterns. You can see them in the patterns we have today with the way, you can express what's happening in society through the cultural context of cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, very well said. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that you're working on right now? Anything you wanted to plug?
Yes, for sure, Robert. I'm always working on something. Apparently, I don't have enough to do. So I just started, as you can tell, that Psycho is one of my favorite movies. And what I realized is that my specialty is actually houses of horror. So I started a book club called Houses of Horror. And it's our first book that we're reading is Shirley Jackson's 1959, The Haunting of Hill House, which, of course, was made into a Netflix series recently, and 2 classic films. So what we do in this book club is read the book and watch the movies. So the book club is available on Fable. It's at fable.co, and there's an app. It's free to join, and you can download the book or use your own copy. And then we're just going to be chatting about that book. And then the second book we're going to read is The Shining. So this is, the whole thing is about houses and buildings that play evil characters in books and movies. And so we're going to be doing that. And then you can catch me on Instagram at Madam Historian. And I actually own a haunted house, and my haunted house is at is Piney Croft A-frame, and that's on Instagram. And that's a house in Florida where I live, and I create all my horror stories.
Awesome. Perfect. That's great. And I'll leave all those links in the description box below if you want to follow what Christine's up to, or join that online book club, and also follow when the book comes out, which is going to be the Hitchcock architecture book is going to be coming out in a year, which I'm really looking forward to. And I just want to mention to the audience, those of you watching on YouTube, there is also an audio version of this podcast, which you can find on any platform, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, places like that. I also have a Patreon membership, and I have a tier which is dedicated to Hitchcock. So the link is in the description box below for that if you want to sign up to become a member. And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free. Just press the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left. You'll see it in just a second. Just click on that. and then click the little bell beside it to get a notification every time I release a new video or when I go live. All right. Well, Christine, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on. I had a great time.
Thanks, Robert. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will see everyone in the next video.